When two students from the Magic Academy challenged each other to a duel, no one expected such an outcome. Gray unleashed a ball of magical ether 100 times larger than his opponent's. If the professor hadn't intervened, the other student would have been completely destroyed. Looking at Gray, no one could understand how he had acquired such power. Never before had a student possessed such magical strength. But the truth is that Gray is a regressor, a popular trope in the manhwa world, and he wasn't always this strong. This is how his story began. It's the final battle between the greatest heroes of humanity and their demonic enemy. But this time, we're not following a glorified and overpowered hero. Instead, this manhwa's protagonist is just a rank-and-file soldier who does his job diligently. Being the nobody that he is, a stray laser beam pierces him straight through the chest. A blow so powerful that he doesn't even try to resist. He just lets it happen, and so his story ends. In his final moments, he looks around. His fellow soldiers are dead, scattered all over the battlefield. As for the so-called great heroes, they are engaged in an intense battle against humanity's arch-enemy, the Liquidator. Among the heroes are 4 brave warriors, each with unique traits and dazzling powers. And then there are the guys like our protagonist, foot soldiers thrown in as sacrificial pawns. Basically, they're like background NPCs with no dialogue whatsoever. Their purpose: to die. He feels pathetic thinking about how little he has contributed to this war. If only he had been born with some talent. But no matter how powerful those heroes are, they don't stand a chance either. The Liquidator slices through them like cucumbers. Literally. A single blow is enough to finish them off. It turns out that monster was just playing with its prey the whole time. The fate of humanity is already sealed, or so Gray thought. Then he remembers that his heart was already torn to shreds, and yet he's not dead. The next thing he knows, he's standing in the middle of the ruins. Before him stands an omnipotent being who gives no explanation as to what is happening. The mysterious figure claims that Gray's body has already healed. But the most incredible thing is that he healed himself, using powers buried within him all this time. The entity continues, saying that Gray is actually much stronger than the Liquidator, a classic manhwa power-up, the same guy who slaughtered the heroes as if they were pigs. However, it's not sure that Gray can handle such power, so for now, it lends him a portion of its own power, just enough to defeat the Liquidator. Back in the real world, Gray's sword is instantly surrounded by a mysterious energy, bestowed by the Almighty Being. Without wasting any time, he puts that energy to the test, to see if it's the real deal or just all talk. It turns out the power is truly devastating, so much so that the Liquidator even compliments him on his strength. But it's still not enough. When Gray goes for another attack, bam! He's split in half just like the others. Blood gushes from his severed body as the Liquidator, curiously, praises him again. He's the first human who has forced it to fight seriously, but the Liquidator is in for another surprise. Gray isn't finished yet. That black energy is fueling him. The lower half of his body that had disappeared a second ago has now reformed, made entirely of dark energy. The guy has completely transformed, Black Clover style. With his gigantic sword, it's an impressive manhwa panel. Someone has managed to make the Liquidator falter. The enemy sees no other option than to raise a hexagonal shield to protect himself. Gray doesn't even look human anymore. He comes down with his colossal sword and the impact sends shockwaves through the air. The shield shatters into brilliant fragments, and the arrogant fool ends up taking the hit head-on. Now, the guy is genuinely questioning if the thing he's facing is even human. Heck, he's not even sure if Gray is still alive. Meanwhile, our boy is asking himself the same question, but right now all that matters is the fight. And yes, this monster from a dark fantasy manhwa is tough as steel, but our boy is just as determined to settle the score and tear this bastard apart. He won't stop until he wipes this threat from the face of the earth. He unleashes another savage slash, and that spawn begins to bleed a creepy kind of golden blood. In response, the creature pulls out a next-level technique and sprouts celestial wings. It seems to be playing with time itself as day turns into night and the moon shines like a divine spotlight. It's an impressive scene straight out of a manhwa, and Gray admits it, but it's not enough to break his confidence. He goes in at full speed, launching a direct attack at the Liquidator's neck. But surprisingly, the sword doesn't pierce through. There's another strange kind of shield around him, then the guy starts spouting a bunch of incomprehensible nonsense. Apparently, within this plane of true twilight, nothing can harm him, or at least that's what this guy claims. He tells Gray to look to the sky to witness just how profound and powerful he is. Curious, our boy looks up and sees some kind of blinding star shining with an insane intensity, and suddenly, boom, the thing plummets from the sky like a meteor and completely annihilates Gray. The Liquidator stands victorious, surveying the crater where his enemy was reduced to nothing. But luckily, The mysterious entity from before appears just in time to rewind everything and send our boy back to the past with a single mission: to save the world. By the way, the mysterious man's name is apparently CRONOS. He and the Liquidator have some kind of history together, but no one is saying what their relationship is. Anyway, back to our boy, who opens his eyes in a quiet, green neighborhood. Right after his regression, everything is serene and calm, and to be honest, quite picturesque. It turns out he's in his hometown, Renato Village, not just his home, but a version from the past, almost 15 years ago. It seems Kronos kept his word. Gray has been sent back in time for one last chance to save the world. Suddenly, he feels a sharp pain in his hand. Looking down, he notices wounds and bandages around his wrist. He then remembers this was the time in his life when he was basically a punching bag for Belder and his gang, a classic Manhwa trope. But with this new chance, it would be pretty pathetic to keep letting them bully him. Although, realistically, there's no way he could take those guys on head-on. They're completely out of his league. Come to think of it, even defeating the Liquidator sounds like a distant dream. In any case, he has to figure out how to deal with these bullies or he's doomed to relive the same suffering over and over again. It seems our boy can't catch a break, can he? He runs right into the very people he feared most, of course, Belder and his goons. Since they've been bored lately, they went out looking for him to continue their tradition of harassment. Like it's some sacred ritual in a manhwa. They toss an old sword at his feet and order him to pick it up. Our boy looks at it, not understanding what the hell they want from him. After all, it's been 15 years, so the memories are a bit hazy. Belder, thinking Gray is pretending not to remember, kindly reminds him of their usual practice battles. Hearing that, Gray tries to get out of it by pointing to his injured hand. He thanks them for the invitation, but unfortunately, he can't participate because the wound hasn't healed. However, it seems he won't get rid of these punks unless he picks up the sword and fights. They even assure him the swords are completely dull, so there's no real risk of getting hurt, but Gray can't shake the feeling that an injury is still possible. No matter how dull the blade is, it's still a piece of iron, a blow in the wrong place, and you've bought yourself a one-way ticket to heaven. And he's right, a light tap to the family jewels, and you'll end up doubled over on the floor in excruciating pain. Still, these typical manhwa idiots don't seem to get the logic behind Gray's words. Belder gets into his stance, ready to attack. He hates being told no by Gray, so he charges at him like a raging bull to start the duel. Gray barely had time to raise his sword, but Belder is already on top of him. Our boy can't believe this guy calls this a practice battle, while he's lunging as if he's furious with his own mother. Then, Gray remembers something an old military doctor told him. The reason his swordsmanship never improved was because of an injury he suffered as a child. Now that he thinks about it, maybe that was the injury that changed his life forever and forced him to live as a nobody, a classic manhwa turning point. Belder brings his sword down, but Gray blurs and dodges the blow. Seriously, even Gray himself is surprised he avoided it. Belder's face tightens, annoyed at seeing such agility. He launches another attack that my boy dodges again, then a quick strike aimed at his feet is also easily avoided. The guy is trying his hardest to hit our boy, looking like a bloodthirsty maniac determined to take him down. But Gray moves like a character from an action manhwa. At first, Gray thought Belder was slow, but then he realizes it's not that Belder has gotten slower, but that he himself has gotten faster. The guy is literally dodging every blow like his rent is due. Even Belder's goons can't ignore what they're seeing. It's as if Gray is a completely different person, like a classic regression manhwa protagonist, in the memories of all the battles he's fought. With all that experience etched into his mind, his body is practically running on autopilot. He barely needs any effort to dodge these attacks. Then, Gray picks up the sword to continue this so-called practice battle, which doesn't feel like practice at all anymore. Belder is drowning in his own ego, trying to crush Gray with his dull blade, but my boy has had enough. He swings his sword for the first time. The sudden pull of his powerful slash leaves Belder's hand burning in pain, which only proves how pathetic Belder is, to be honest. In reality, he feels like the loser for having to fight such a weakling, but he also believes that Belder doesn't deserve an ounce of pity. He's the fool who bullied him, stole his future, and caused him all that suffering. So with all due respect, Gray is going to give Belder a taste of his own medicine with the next move. Gray effortlessly snatches the sword away, disarming him instantly, while Belder can only taste humiliation. Gray realizes this guy is even worse than he thought, and takes the opportunity to drop a taunt, mocking his incompetence with the sword. A single blow was enough to send his weapon flying, but hey, being disarmed is no big deal, after all. It was Belder who claimed the swords were completely safe to fight with. Gray, in true manhwa protagonist fashion, completely unleashes himself. He swings the sword so fast it literally cuts Belder's skin, causing blood to spurt out. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Belder's legs give out and he collapses. Wait a second. Gray thought the sword was blunt. How the hell is this guy bleeding? When he looks at his blade to confirm, he realizes it is indeed a blunt sword, though if it had been a sharp one, Belder would already be dead. But let's not get distracted from the moment. Gray lands another precise blow, knocking out several teeth and leaving Belder with his nose a complete mess, bleeding like a stuck pig. My boy stands over him, imposing, striking a fear into him that he'll never forget. It's always satisfying in a revenge manhwa to see arrogant guys turned into a crying mess. It seems this will be enough to humiliate Belder for the rest of his life. Or well, I spoke too soon. This scumbag still hasn't learned his lesson, ordering his goons to grab our boy and beat him to a pulp. The minions hesitate to advance for obvious reasons, since they just saw their boss get beaten like a dog. It makes no sense to follow the same path, even though they could avoid it. One of them suggests attacking all at the same time to overwhelm Gray. The three of them jump in unison, surrounding him from all directions. Gray, however, remains as calm as ever. If these idiots really want to die, my boy is more than ready. They all lunge at him, determined to finish him right then and there. At first, Gray felt a bit of compassion for these guys and thought about sparing them, but it seems they won't learn until they get a taste of pain. So he gives these gutter rats what they truly deserve. Shortly after, their faces are as swollen as a baboon's butt after a ruthless facial massage. Once again, Gray finds it ridiculous that these crying emojis in human form were once his worst nightmare. The manhwa is setting up a new arc as he recalls this group are currently students at the Syria fencing dojo. Belder admits they are students of that dojo, though they haven't attended lately, as these soggy biscuits believed they were already powerful enough, though that's a pretty low bar for someone who's supposed to be strong. It's not like Gray expects much from the dojo itself either. He shows interest in joining the dojo, so he wants these thugs to act as his references. Belder refuses to comply with the request. After all, he can't imagine the consequences when their master finds out they were so miserably defeated. Gray knows exactly how to deal with these guys. He simply swings his sword to intimidate them, hinting at the worst that could happen if they don't cooperate. Funnily enough, this little threat works like a charm. Belder not only humbles himself, but that beating gives him the speed of a cheetah. He literally sprints down the road to the dojo as fast as he can, leaving even his friends behind. A short while later, they enter the town. As they walk, Belder expresses his curiosity about why Gray wants to join a dojo. It turns out that dojo has a recommendation spot for the academy. Our boy doesn't need to say more, as he's sure that Belder is mature enough to understand what his real goal is. One of the guys wonders why Gray even feels the need to join an academy when he's already so powerful. But these idiots don't get that for a manhwa protagonist like him. Enough has a different meaning. He vividly remembers the day all of humanity's heroes were slaughtered like pigs in the blink of an eye, and that was supposed to be the strongest team in the world, a classic manhwa setup. Forget the heroes, even he couldn't lay a scratch on that guy, despite all the mysterious power he had. Only God knows how much strength will be enough to defeat that monster. Although he wasn't completely hopeless back then, the moment he obtained those awesome dark powers, he felt like an omnipotent being, capable of destroying anything. What held him back was his lack of swordsmanship skills. He had been relying on a few tricks he learned from the Sword Saint. If only he had spent more time training with the sword, like the Sword Saint did, he's sure he could have turned the tide of battle all by himself. That's probably why CRONOS sent him here to train relentlessly until he's worthy of wielding that mysterious dark power again in this classic manhwa training arc. A short while later, we meet the master those thugs were talking about. The group is getting a good scolding for starting a fight with some random civilian, and to make matters worse, all they got after challenging that civilian was a humiliating defeat. This intimidating woman is the instructor of the swordsmanship dojo, a true master as often seen in a manhwa, named Syria. Belder tries to clarify that they weren't trying to intimidate anyone, that it was just a practice battle. The poor sap gets a devastating blow for his lies, so hard it could have sent him to the moon on a one-way ticket. His companions tremble in fear, hoping to survive the day. Nothing to fear, guys. The move she just pulled was a small lesson she wanted to teach these fools. If they call ganging up on an unarmed person a practice battle, then what she just did also counts as one. She then points her sword right at Belder's ugly face and expels him from the dojo immediately. Not just him, but his sidekicks too. So those pathetic bullies take their pathetic loser leader and leave pathetically. She immediately turns around, kneels, and apologizes to her new recruit on behalf of her former students, who caused him so much trouble. Our boy brushes off the apology. Back to business, she has heard he wants a recommendation for the academy, and he confirms it. Since Belder and his B team caused him so much trouble, she's willing to write him a letter of recommendation, although before she does, She wants him to prove his worth. Both opponents face off, wooden swords in hand. As the veteran, she generously gives him the chance to attack first, and so the exchange of blows begins. They move so fast, like something out of a manhwa, that literally the only thing they leave behind are after images of silhouettes traced by their fierce attacks. Throughout the fight, Syria carries out her duty to assess our boy's capabilities. She can tell that his swordsmanship style is quite practical for his age. It's as if he's been through countless battles before. Now it makes sense why those idiots were so easily defeated by a single person, just like in an action manhwa. His style is mostly self-taught, although occasionally his sword handling resembles the techniques taught at the academy. This probably means that someone instructed him at some point, though his technique is still somewhat rough. Still, one thing is certain. He possesses the pure talent of a future manhwa protagonist, a diamond in the rough that just needs to be polished and fully utilized. Once she has assessed him, she decides to end the duel with one last blow, but our boy prepares himself and blocks her attack with complete ease. The macabre dance begins again. The guy is deflecting every one of her attacks as if he were allergic to damage. This starts to make the woman nervous. The lack of hesitation in his movements unnerves her. None of her attacks manage to break his stance. She even starts to get irritated with herself, realizing she has to go all out in a practice match that, in theory, was only meant to gauge the young man's skills. Syria feels overwhelmed, to the point of experiencing fear for an instant. Gray looks like a demonic entity about to unleash a devastating power, a scene worthy of a dark fantasy manhwa. However, after effortlessly surviving the last blow, she realizes it was a wild, uncontrolled attack. After that move, Gray starts to feel exhausted, and his energy level plummets. The woman sees him looking worn out and mistakenly interprets it as a weakness in his defense, so she pounces on him like a wildcat, only to be utterly defeated on the spot. The tables are turned, her wooden sword shatters and falls to the ground, while Gray stands motionless, stunned for a second. He felt himself reconnecting with that same dark power he had used in his battle against the Liquidator. The fact that this manhwa protagonist manifested a sliver of that power means he can still access his abilities, a key plot point for this manhwa, even after having returned to the past. But then it happens. A painful backlash invades his body, causing him such agony that he falls to his knees. He can't even stay on his feet, as Syria, alarmed by his condition, tries to help him. Gray understands that his current body cannot handle the use of his abilities. Still, he musters the determination to get up, despite his body trembling. After assuring her that he's fine, he gets lost in his thoughts, aware that he can barely stand, which makes it clear to him that he must learn to use his power with extreme precision. He also contemplates the idea of telling the master swordswoman the truth about his power, but Syria looks at him, completely confused, not understanding what's happening. Gray, keeping a cool head, concludes that he shouldn't tell anyone what happened. After all, who would believe such an absurd, manhwa-like story? Besides, he can't even control his dark powers at will to prove it. With that in mind, he makes up an innocent excuse, saying he simply pushed himself too hard. But the master doesn't believe him for a second, finding his attempted explanation ridiculous. There's no way he could have broken his wooden sword in a duel with a blunt weapon. She's shrewd enough to understand that Gray is hiding something from her, a classic plot point in this type of manhwa. Burgle's daughter aims what's left of her sword at him, prompting Gray to ask if her reaction means there's a problem. She understands that he doesn't want to talk about the matter for now, so instead of pressing him, she respects his decision and asks about his initial interest in getting a recommendation for the academy. Our boy confirms this, explaining that he heard she could help him with that. Syrian doesn't deny it. In fact, she claims that with her authority she can get him a recommendation for the Royal Fencing Academy, the best educational institution in the kingdom. However, to Gray's surprise, she adds that she has no interest in recommending him to attend that academy, since she considers him unfit for it. Her cold words wounded him more deeply than any sword could. Gray begins to beat himself up internally, doubting his skills and admitting that he's too weak. His final attack was the only noteworthy thing he'd done in that battle. But wait, Syrian hasn't finished speaking yet. She continues her train of thought, arguing that instead of the Royal Academy, the boy should go to the World Union Academy. What a plot twist. A classic manhwa reveal that hits him like a freight train. Although the Royal Academy is the best in their country, the World Union Academy is the best in the entire world. That institution is considered the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Gray is left speechless, because that very same magical academy is responsible for producing the strongest battle squads, including figures like the Sword Saint. Ami immediately confronts Syrian, questioning if he is even qualified to attend such a prestigious institution. Ironically, Syrian shatters his expectations, pointing out that in his current state, he doesn't have the slightest chance of even getting through the door. The Swordmaster knows that even Gray is aware of his own limitations, especially when it comes to his current weak physical condition. As for the Royal Academy, the boy might be able to pull off a miracle solely thanks to his swordsmanship skills. But that's not the case for the World Union Academy. So yes, the young man is in trouble if he doesn't train with all his might. Even Syrian is amazed. The boy has a miraculous talent with the sword, a classic Manhwa protagonist trait, and yet he has a very frail body. Doubt begins to creep in, making Gray worry genuinely about the powerful opponents he'll have to face at the World Union Academy. This Manhwa story arc won't be a walk in the park, and with his current body, that's completely out of the question. Seeing his pitiful state, Syrian points out how quickly he gives up, even though there are still 9 months until the entrance exam. Lacking confidence in his abilities, Gray thinks that even that much time won't be enough for him. Despite her efforts to encourage him, even Syrian admits the time frame is quite short, but she still offers him a chance. The Swordmaster wants him to trust her for the next 9 months, because during that time, she will make him train like never before, kicking off a true Manhwa training arc. Yeah, something tells me she's going to hire David Goggins and have this kid run 3 ultramarathons and do 6,000 pull-ups. Anyway, Gray admits that although he doesn't want to suffer, he has no other choice, declaring he's ready, and hopes the Master Swordswoman will take good care of him. Sarah appreciates his determination. At first, you'd probably think it's a good sign that they're starting off on the right foot, but the atmosphere immediately shifts to total fear when the daughter of Virgil officially announces the start of his harsh training. His training is a classic part of any battle manhwa, and he trains like Goku. And honestly, he eats like him too. She really puts him through a strengthening phase, and he also has to endure questionable food, but his master is relentless and puts him through everything. Their sword duels continue as always, aiming to perfect his techniques. And so, 8 months passed. Congratulations to Gray for achieving his athletic body. After enduring so much training, even Sarah admires his physical condition. Now that they've reached this point, she has nothing more to offer him. He's ready to go out into the real world, but her relaxed attitude confuses Gray because there's still a whole month before the entrance exam. Virgil's daughter reminds him that he'll spend a lot of time traveling to the exam location, so he should leave early. As a final show of gratitude, Sarah hands him a bag of money, ensuring a smooth journey and covering his expenses for the month. Now that's a true master. As for our boy, he still doesn't feel right about leaving so soon. Her straightforward attitude saddens him because he thinks his master is pushing him away as if he were a burden. Smiling at his response, she thinks he's overcomplicating the situation. Suddenly, Gray mentions the rumor of a nearby ogre nest, a classic Manhwa threat, which immediately gets Sarah's attention. He also points out that the town is completely unsafe due to the lack of guards. The Master Swordswoman confirms the nest's existence, as it was recently discovered. At the same time, she smiles calmly, believing nothing bad will happen. In the worst-case scenario, she remarks, they'll just have to rely on help from the royal capital. Although Gray is worried, she believes his only priority should be focusing on his exam without any distracting thoughts. This entire setup is a popular manhwa trope. In his mind, he is completely convinced that his master is lying to reassure him, so he won't worry. The royal capital will never send help to a small town, and when the ogres attack and destroy it, that will inevitably lead to Sarah's death. In his previous life, a key plot point in this manhwa, Gray had learned that she died facing the battle all by herself. Still, he doesn't tell her any of this and simply accepts the situation, thanking his master for everything she has done for him. Gray plans to leave immediately, which brings a smile to Sarah's face. She, with her characteristic confidence and enthusiasm, wishes him the best in passing his exam. A few days later, we see a scene where Sarah is traversing a dangerous path towards the nest. There, the skeletal remains of humans hang horribly from the trees as a warning. Sarah tries to track the nest's exact location, using the information she got from a scout. Noticing a trail of blood in front of her, she knows danger is very close, but before she can do anything, the Master Swordswoman is startled by a familiar voice, her disciple, Gray, sitting on a tree branch in a classic manhwa cliffhanger. He asks where his dear master is headed so late at night. Startled by his sudden appearance, she asks what he's doing there when he's supposed to be focused on the academy. After landing nimbly on the ground, Gray provokes her, saying that if anything, he should be the one questioning her. He reminds her that she lied when she said she would ignore the nest situation and let the royal capital handle the matter, just making an excuse. Sarah explains that the capital refused to send aid due to their own affairs, which is why she decided to take care of the problem personally. She is confident in her sword skills and believes that whatever is hiding in that nest, she can defeat it. Based on the scout's report, she reveals that her opponent will be an elite ogre with about 50 subordinate monsters. a classic manhwa quest. She knows that facing them will be difficult due to their large numbers, but that doesn't stop her. For his part, even Gray admits that an elite ogre isn't that strong, at least not enough to defeat a woman of her level. However, the worrying thing about ogres is not their individual strength, but their intelligence and the overwhelming number of creatures that usually gather in those nests. If they manage to surround her, it will undoubtedly be the end for her. Besides, Gray knows something with absolute certainty. Thanks to his memories from his past life, letting Sarah face this mission alone would be sending her straight to her death, a trope common in many a regression manhwa. And in the end, the town would also be destroyed, left without any protector. That is the dark future he has already lived through once. With that in mind, the young disciple asks to join her on the mission, but his master firmly refuses, assuring him that she can handle it by herself. Instead of continuing to insist, Gray changes his strategy. He tells her he wants to get real combat experience, even provoking her a little by asking if she's afraid he'll become a burden. Although his words are cunning, his master can't help but laugh at the absurdity of his comment. The skill difference between them is minimal. In fact, during their training, she sometimes has a hard time facing him. But even so, Sarah reminds him that a real battle is very different, especially when it's a monster nest like this one. It's an extremely dangerous task, and that's why she doesn't want Gray to risk his life, at least not until he gains more experience. The disciple feels dejected hearing her firm decision, as Sarah is unwilling to budge, so Gray resorts to his last option, an idea he wants to test on his master. At first, she is surprised, until Gray directly challenges her to a fight, promising to knock her unconscious and then leave alone to face the ogre. The situation becomes tense. The disciple has just challenged his master to a real battle, his sword pointed at her, a scene straight from a climactic manhwa chapter. Gray awaits her response. Realizing her student is as stubborn as she is, Sarah admits defeat. She doesn't want him to go alone, so she accepts his earlier suggestion to go together. All she cares about is that he returns whole, and yes, him in one piece. It's on. The two of them team up and venture into the forest to face the monsters. The night wears on, and eventually, the master and disciple discover the nest's location. The intelligent monsters use their environment to their advantage. They have created a nest that leaves no room for escape, in case anyone dares to come all the way there to challenge them. Sarah thinks the creatures must be very confident in their abilities, while Gray, she argues that it's actually a disadvantage for the two of them, as they'll have to fight carefully while observing from a safe distance. She is surprised. The boss is not among the group, which makes her wonder if he is hiding in his tent. If that is the case, it is a good thing for them, because that way they can kill many of the minions before the elite ogre confronts them. To discuss their battle strategy, Syria instructs her student to attack the monsters from one side, while she covers the other. Executing the plan immediately, they both launch into action with their swords in hand. The confrontation begins. Before the monsters can even comprehend the situation, the majestic Syria is already upon them. She executes a clean strike to the head, turning the monster's head into a ball that rolls across the ground. With the first monster down, the rest of them growl and roar at each other in their own language. The entire group becomes enraged and enters kill mode, preparing their weapons to kill the intruders, but it doesn't matter, because our boy has gone into beast mode, massacring the horde like a true manhwa protagonist. He's a one-man army, cutting down multiple monsters at the same time. The elegant Syria is not to be outdone, showcasing the impressive skills she learned from Dad Burgle. The two of them are unstoppable. Gray and Syria perfectly cover each other's backs. In a matter of minutes, all the monsters in sight have become a simple body count. By the way, she is quite impressed by the determination. Gray shows in a real battle. He has never been so prepared, and he warns his teacher to stay on her toes as well. However, something gives him a bad feeling, a classic setup in this kind of manhwa. This fight has been too easy for them. Too easy, in fact. Because if this was the level of enemies Syria was supposed to face, then she would have been able to defeat them all by herself, even without his help. And that makes him nervous, because whatever is resting inside the tent will be much more terrifying than anything they have faced so far. This is a common trope in many action manhwa. A pair of menacing eyes glows from the dark tent, watching him from afar. The moment Gray makes eye contact with the creature, he shudders in fear. Despite his strength, he backs away and tells his teacher that they must leave immediately. Even Syria doesn't understand what's suddenly wrong with him. Without explaining anything, he yells for them to run with so much fear in his voice that Syria doesn't question it. She simply follows his instructions and runs after him. As they run, you might think they'll escape, but in this manhwa, things are never that simple. Their terrifying opponent literally leaps from the sky in a massive drop. Gray is terrified as the monster plants its feet on the ground. Confronting the bold humans, Syria's determined expression changes to one of shock, noting how the boss monster has come personally to face them. But then Gray drops a bombshell that no one expected, a classic manhwa twist. That's not the boss monster at all. Just as he's about to reveal the location of the real boss, a monstrous voice roars behind them. That roar causes another horde of creatures to chase them. The deafening sound is overwhelming for Syria, but for the ogres, it turns them into bloodthirsty maniacs. Syria trembles in fear, unable to comprehend what her senses perceive. There is a creature even more terrifying, more sinister than an elite ogre, and it is commanding the whole group. Finally, Gray reveals that they are facing a general ogre. He's the true boss of the monster nest, and I must remind you they're literally cornered. On one side, the elite ogre blocks their escape, and turning back isn't an option either, because a huge horde awaits them along with the actual nest boss. Sarah expresses her horror, knowing they can't face such a creature at their level. Their only chance of survival is to kill the elite ogre in front of them so they can escape, so she does exactly that. She lunges at the beast and clashes her weapon against its, determined to win. She takes advantage of an opening and manages to land a clean cut on the creature's body. Blood spurts from the wound, but while that would normally be a good sign, her concern grows as she notices the wound beginning to regenerate. Meanwhile, our guy is fighting dozens of monsters alone, a classic manhwa scenario, while sharing his knowledge about the ogre general's abilities. Apparently, its roar greatly increases the monster's strength and recovery speed. Basically, they're fighting an elite ogre on steroids. Defeating even a normal one would already be extremely difficult, and now even Gray is having trouble. Slicing through one of the monsters, he tells Sarah to cover his back. He tells her to just delay the fight a little longer, which makes her wonder what kind of strategy he has miraculously planned. To that, he replies that in a situation like this, there's only one objective: kill the ugliest one of them all, the guy hiding behind his horde. The fight for survival begins as Gray clashes his sword with a monster's, frustrated at being surrounded. He deflects an attack and meets another enemy charging at him. He cuts down those in front of him, trying to carve a path toward his target. However, in a careless moment, he uses so much force that his sword literally shatters. This is a serious problem, because now he's without his main weapon. He dodges the buffed ogre's downward slash and quickly draws his spare sword. Yes, that's the smartest protagonist we've seen in a while. Carrying a second sword is a level of preparedness you don't always see in a manhwa. Still, Gray fears his new blade won't last long. Luckily for him, his master tosses him her spare sword, giving him another chance to fight. With both weapons in hand, he has better odds, though still not enough to defeat all the monsters. There are too many of them, and breaking through to the ogre general is still nearly impossible. Trusting his skills, he launches into an attack with superhuman speed, cutting down enemies left and right. The action in this manhwa is intense. His momentum is broken when one of the ogres tries to attack him. Luckily, he dodges and blocks just in time. The fight is exhausting him, but he has managed to advance quite a bit. The ogre general, feeling threatened, lets out a second monstrous roar to Gray's horror. The strengthened creatures receive another power boost. Things are getting worse, and he's now being overwhelmed again. Gray realizes the general is smart enough to understand his strategy. Now that it knows what the human is trying to do, it keeps roaring to rile up its minions. Blocking a blow, Gray pushes through the monsters and rushes forward. An entire horde awaits him. Instead of facing them all, he only cuts down those directly in his path, but even so, he ends up covered in wounds and scratches. A true manhwa bloodbath is draining him as he tries to push through the endless barrage of attacks. He lets his guard down for a second and one of the ogres charges him, knocking him down and pinning him to the ground. Things look really bad for him, because the ogres have him right where they want him. Luckily, since they're so enraged, they've lost all sense of cooperation, and one of them ends up cutting down one of its own without a second thought. Gray realizes their strategy is probably to wear down his swords, but while he's lost in thought, a gigantic ogre prepares a devastating punch to crush his head. It's a life or death situation and he can't afford to take the hit, so he uses his sword to reduce the damage. Still, the impact sends him crashing brutally to the ground with a tremendous thud. On the verge of death, the man still tries to get up despite his battered state. That's the definition of true bravery, the kind you root for in a manhwa. With the previous attack destroying his spare sword, he now has only one sword left and dozens of ogres to defeat, in addition to their boss. Once again, the situation is not in his favor. In fact, getting out of this alive is practically impossible, a classic setup in any action manhwa, even though he's a regressor. He perfectly understands his current situation. Gray simply can't win, not against so many monsters thirsting for blood that are wearing him down bit by bit. So, he decides to change his strategy, yelling at his master to run while he offers himself as a decoy to buy her time to escape. Syria hears him and smiles, refusing to treat him that way. She continues to face the strengthened elite ogre, but Gray doesn't understand why she's still determined to fight. He urges her to run, assuring her he'll catch up soon. But Syria rejects his suggestion, revealing in horror that she's lost the ability to run. A large wound on her thigh has shattered Gray's hopes. In this brutal Manhwa world, even that plan is no longer possible. There is no other path but to march toward death. Swinging his sword with fury, he thinks about the reason he returned to the past. Despite carrying such a heavy purpose, everything is about to end tragically. His last sword also splinters and shatters into pieces, and yet he refuses to accept it. Even though he's lost his weapon, Gray refuses to believe this is the end of his life. If only he could use the power from the future, that terrifying ability that rivaled the Exterminator and was able to wound him, if he could just use that incredible power, a true game-changer in any manhwa, for just a moment, these monsters would be torn to shreds. With sheer willpower, he recreates in his mind the sensation he felt that time. He charges his broken sword and enters a state of deep concentration. When he opens his eyes again, Gray is no longer the same weak person from before. A single, dark, fiery slash, like a scene from an epic manhwa, tears the ogres apart, reducing them to ash with his flaming black sword. Even Syria doesn't understand what's happening, but it seems our hero is still in control, as even after unleashing his dark power, he gives her a relieved smile. In the following seconds, Gray cuts down every creature in sight, including the ogre general. Not even his master can comprehend what just happened. She's too focused on the elite ogre in front of her, but now that the general is dead, the strengthening abilities disappear. Syria understands she can now easily kill the beast, since it can no longer regenerate. Using a simple version of her ultimate technique, she slices the creature in two, declaring that an elite ogre is nothing without its master. They finally win. They both manage to survive against all odds and win the battle. Despite having miraculously wiped out an entire horde of ogres, Gray apologizes for breaking his sword. Sarah replies that it doesn't matter compared to him saving her life. She picks up the sword and prepares to ask him about the technique he used at the end, but before she can finish her sentence, our hero collapses to the ground, completely unconscious from the side effects, leaving his master shouting his name in concern. The perspective shifts to inside Gray's mind, a classic manhwa technique. He wonders where he is, seeing nothing but a chained, floating door in front of him. Confused, he watches as the door releases, the same dark energy he uses in his ability. Then, a sudden realization hits him. That is his own power, a pivotal moment in this manhwa. He wonders what would happen if he managed to break that door. After all, he could obtain that power and make it his own. Determined to try, he moves forward. But the moment he takes his first step, a deadly sensation takes over his body, chilling his soul with fear. And that happens after just one step. Gray is so paralyzed by terror that he immediately backs away. He doesn't have all the answers about the origin of his power, but one thing has become very clear to him. If he dares to use his abilities in his current state, he will undoubtedly die, raising the stakes of this manhwa. And it's not just a guess, because the feeling is so terrifying it brings him to tears. From the void, a voice seeps into his mind, congratulating him on the decision he just made. Before Gray can process what's happening, he wakes up with a start in his bed. His master is by his side, relieved to see him finally awake. Worried, he asks where he is. She explains that she brought him to the village infirmary as fast as she could. The boy was unconscious for 5 whole days, and I'm glad the author didn't use the 3-day trope common in every other manhwa. Anyway, she feared for his life while Gray tries to process that he needed almost a week to recover from the strain caused by the technique he used. Even Sarah thinks he overdid it in that battle. It was the very definition of defying the impossible. Still, she's worried about the state of his body and asks if he can move properly. To check, the young man tries to lift his arm, but he can't. He can barely move it after expending so much energy. In his current state, there's no way he can hold a sword with such an injury. In fact, he couldn't even perform the most basic tasks. A harsh reality for our manhwa protagonist, so he must solve this problem quickly. Then there's the bruise on his arm, a result of the battle. Sarah looks concerned about his condition, knowing he can't move his body. Gray confirms that, indeed, he is completely helpless right now. Even his master admits his arm won't return to normal anytime soon, revealing that every bone in his arm was shattered to pieces. This revelation shocks the young man, as curiously, he feels no pain. That's due to the treatment with a magic potion he received. Gray is flabbergasted because those potions are incredibly expensive, and she used one on him without hesitation. Sarah explains that he shouldn't worry, as the village chief personally gave it to them as a reward. The boy can't believe what he's hearing. He doesn't even know the village chief, and yet, he has received a magic potion thanks to him. Sarah calls him a fool for not understanding his situation, and makes it crystal clear. Gray is officially the village's savior and hero, a classic development for a manhwa. Before he can process what he just heard, the village chief bursts in to greet the boy and thank him for everything he did. To highlight the magnitude of his feat, he reminds him that an ogre general, a truly fearsome monster in this manhwa, is so powerful that, normally, it takes an entire city to face just one of them. That creature threatened their village, and yet a single young man was able to break through. He slayed the monster and ensured everyone's survival. That's why the village chief is deeply grateful for the brave efforts of the boy and his teacher. Unable to accept all the credit, Gray insists they're exaggerating what he did. But the village chief believes he is the one downplaying his own achievement. After a moment's thought, Gray reflects on the outcome. Maybe the chief is right. He remembers his past life in that timeline. This place was reduced to ashes by ogres. That is the true meaning of his victory. The village leader is delighted to continue, praising him, but for now he focuses on the young man's goal: to pass the entrance exam for the World Union Academy. At its mention, Gray remembers his main objective. He was so reckless that he rushed off to kill monsters in the nest just a few weeks before the exam. With all the time he wasted in between, he only has 2 days left before the exam, and to make matters worse, it takes 3 days to get there on foot. His best option would be to use a horse to cover the distance in time, but he's completely broke, and he can't afford to buy one. Suddenly he begs the village chief to lend him a horse for the journey. The good thing is, the leader already expected the boy to make such a request, so he had already prepared the best horse for his travels. Sarah smiles, revealing that their original plan was to carry him there themselves even if he hadn't woken up today. Some people really have your back despite your troubles, just like Gray's friends in this manhwa. And hopefully we find more people like that in our own lives. Gray leaves the infirmary only to find the entire village cheering his name and encouraging him for the exam. They want him to do his best and are not afraid to thank him for what he did. The villagers even help him with a bag of money. Everyone donated a little so he could apply for the entrance exam and support himself at the academy. The boy is eternally grateful to the villagers who showed him so much love and support. Jokingly, he says it will be really embarrassing if he fails and has to come back, but Sarah has absurd confidence in her student. She emphasizes that other applicants for the entrance exam wouldn't be able to defeat an ogre general on their own. However, that's not the only problem. The boy is worried about his arm since it's still damaged and it's unknown when it will heal. To that, his teacher replies that he should just use his left arm in the meantime. Although his left arm works perfectly, he is more used to his right, but his teacher believes that with his skill level, it won't matter. Gray expresses his concern, saying the level of the entrance exam might be so high that having a useless arm could hurt him. Still, Sarah understands that the teachers or examiners at the academy have a very sharp eye. When they see his talent, they will choose him. The boy mounts his horse, as his teacher declares, with complete confidence that he is going to pass. That is the only possibility. Thanking her for everything she's done, he promises not to fail. Remembering how the village was raised in his past life, he's happy these people got a second chance alongside him. The world of this manhwa is already changing from this moment on, and he will make sure to influence the future with his new power in the next scene. Our boy finally reaches his destination, and looking ahead, he beholds the grandeur of the World Union Academy. In the arena, the examiner announces the distribution of the exam tickets. All candidates are to remain in the arena. At a glance, there are a huge number of applicants, but in this competitive manhwa, only a small number of 20 will secure a spot in the class. They discuss the changing number of spots each year, as in some years the academy accepted 50 people, while in rare cases it only accepted 1. So, the selection rules are apparently not absolute anyway. Professor Ariel takes the stage and steps forward, addressing the examinees and explaining that they will have to collect the paper presented to them. With a snap of her fingers, a yellow vortex opens up, releasing magical energy and automatically makes the tickets appear in each examinee's hands. Our boy collects his ticket. His examinee number is 513 for the swordsmanship course. Professor Ariel adds that the ticket contains only the most important details, but there's nothing to worry about, as the process is the same every year. She also confirms that the academy doesn't care about anyone's age or gender, nationality, or class. In other words, they literally don't give a damn if you're an attack helicopter or not. They don't even bother to learn their names. The candidates destined to pass will be the only ones asked for more information. For the rest, it doesn't matter. Professor Ariel even confirms that it's fine if they give a fake name, which proves once again that the Academy doesn't care. Anyway, in a classic manhwa trope, trouble finds our boy again. His predicament is a classic setup in this kind of manhwa, as he came without his sword today, yet he was assigned to the swordsmanship course, making him question the system's legitimacy. Professor Ariel continues by humorously saying she assigned the courses to each person based on their appearance. She's supposed to be perceptive or something, but it's funny that a minute ago she was talking about not discriminating and then she says that. Ariel has no problem correcting the course details in case she made a mistake. Even the examinees think it's impossible to assign a course based on sight alone, especially when there are so many of them. They suspect strongly that the Academy must have investigated them beforehand, and that's why they know. The possibility of mind-reading magic, a cool element in any manhwa, also comes up. Professor Ariel doesn't address any of their concerns. The only thing she notices is that no one is complaining about their assigned course. So, next, she decides to reveal everyone's exam schedule. The detail is printed on the ticket immediately. Gray is nervous because his exam is scheduled for the first day, giving him no time for his arm to heal. Ariel reveals that this exam will only be held once and will decide everything. If a candidate is late, immediate disqualification will be the only outcome. She also reminds them that their schedules are strict and will not be manipulated or discussed upon request. This is bad news for Gray, who is struggling with his recovery. It's a tense moment in the manhwa as he prays for his body to work a miracle and heal him by tomorrow. The next day arrives and, what do you know? The poor guy hasn't healed one bit. He has no choice but to take the exam in this condition. Gray's number is called and, frustrated, he steps forward. He tries to calm himself down to stay optimistic about the situation. Upon assessing his left arm, it doesn't seem to have any problems, and he can also move his right one if he makes enough of an effort. His current strategy is to carefully observe the examiner's movements and figure out a winning strategy from that. He is watching a match between a candidate and an examiner. The applicant blindly rushes to attack, but in the end, the examiner is unfazed and just stands there waiting for his next move. The candidate drags his sword for another slash, but even that strike is useless. It's blocked and, not only that, the examiner deflects his blade before sending him flying with a final blow. As his body falls to the ground, the examiner concludes the result of the exam and instructs the candidate to leave the premises. You might think Gray has learned something, but the funny thing is that he literally gives up and accepts that he's about to be mercilessly defeated. His number is called to enter the arena. Gray reflects on his chances, realizing he clearly can't beat an examiner who annihilated a candidate bigger than him, a classic setup in any action manhwa. Inside the arena, he's granted the freedom to make the first move. Still, he perfectly understands that this battle will be one-sided. Still, he must leave some kind of impression. The match begins with Gray lunging to attack. He remembers his master's advice, who told him to use his entire body to deliver a powerful slash instead of just using his arms. Channeling that advice into action, he thinks that the only way to compensate for the loss of strength in his right arm is to use his other muscles, and so he throws his first strike, which the examiner easily dodges. Even now, Gray finds himself struggling to fight with his usual style. After all, even though he tries to compensate for the weakness in his right arm, he's still at a huge disadvantage. The examiner counters by trying to cut him down, but to Gray's amazement, the sword moves too slowly. This is a classic manhwa moment where he can read its trajectory without having to rush, so our boy successfully blocks the attack, though he feels the weight of the examiner's strength behind the blow. At the same time, he judges that the examiner's technique isn't as refined as Sidria's. If he focuses on the techniques he learned from her, he might have a chance to exploit an opening and counterattack. With that strategy in mind, Gray lunges with all his might in an attempt to overwhelm the instructor, and the instructor is actually being pushed back. His speed becomes his own undoing. Gray starts to gain confidence, realizing that he can easily defeat this examiner, a turning point for any manhwa protagonist. His master's words return to his mind. Their swords clash once more, but Gray overwhelms his opponent with a complete parry. Ready to end the battle, with his newfound confidence, Gray continues his relentless assault, a classic power-up moment in this type of manhwa. Although our boy has seen through his opponent's technique, neutralizing it with a handicap is still a difficult task. He takes advantage of the speed difference and launches a direct thrust, only for it to be deflected. The difference in raw strength is just too great. Breaking the instructor's stance is easier said than done, a common hurdle for a manhwa hero, with two hands, let alone with just one. Still, Gray's aggressiveness is making the instructor's movements clumsier bit by bit. It's a bit risky, but he could try to press his luck. With a clear plan in mind, Gray allows the instructor to push him to the edge of the stage, exposing a huge gap in his defense. Just as he expected, the guy with the glasses falls for the trap and lunges in for the final blow. The instructor falls for the oldest trick in the book. He makes a wide and careless move, a rookie mistake in this manhwa world. Just as Gray had anticipated, the young manhwa warrior adjusted his stance and let the blow come. Nothing exposes an opening more than a reckless and greedy attack. A large and predictable move was precisely what he needed. To leverage his speed advantage, in an instant he reached the instructor's vulnerable flank. No matter how great the power difference, you can't defend against a fierce blow from behind, milliseconds from plunging his sword in for the win. The referee intervened to signal the end of the match. Gray held back and lowered his blade. The fight was over, but it felt a little short. With the exam's time limit met, the referee announced the result as a draw. The young man gritted his teeth in frustration. He had failed. After all the effort he put in, he couldn't make it. He gripped his trusty sword for a moment before relaxing his hold. Gray walked off the stage and accepted the result. With dignity, he had given it his all. If he can't even win against an instructor with or without an injury, his ambitious goals are further away than he thought. Looking on the bright side, his arm should be healed by next year, so he can be at 100% to retake the entrance exam, regardless of the outcome. This was a valuable experience worthy of gratitude. It's been a week since Gray almost secured a victory against that guy with the glasses, a classic manhwa setup. Today, the faculty of the World Union Academy gathered in room 53 to discuss the results of the entrance exam, a pivotal scene in this manhwa. The white-haired old man started the meeting, allowing his colleagues to freely express their opinions on this year's group. Immediately, complaints and laments filled the room this year. They had devised a method for each professor to observe the exams together. It was a rather inefficient and tedious process, of course. Some did like the format. They can't afford to overlook a promising manhwa talent just for the faculty's convenience. After all, the old man steered the discussion away from the exam system and focused it back on the students with potential. Starting with the swordsmanship course, he summoned magical recordings of each examinee to make a final assessment of those who had passed. Naturally, those who directly defeated the examiner passed. Those who failed to do so would be evaluated on the qualities they demonstrated and how they held out during the 15 minutes of combat. Besides those who wiped the floor with the instructor, they narrowed the list of outstanding candidates to numbers 5, 217, and 753. Everyone agreed to draw the line there. If they added any more lesser talents, those poor kids wouldn't be able to keep up with the classes. No one opposed the decision. Thus, the approved candidates for the swordsmanship course were confirmed and registered, or so it was supposed to be, until a playful voice mentioned candidate number 513, Gray, our potential manhwa lead. It came from none other than the enigmatic red-haired professor, Ariel, as she brought up an unknown number. The other professors reviewed the recording. They had to admit that with one more second, the young man probably would have won this epic manhwa battle. But they also noted that he relied on tactics and tricks to beat an examiner. The academy might prove too demanding for him. The professors with a trained eye for swordsmanship could see his solid technique, but also the lack of power and the clear mismatch, a common struggle for a growing manhwa hero, from beginning to end. In conclusion, the professors of the swordsmanship course, they rejected the idea of accepting candidate 513 into the academy, while mocking the boy's flaws. Professor Ariel looked at her colleagues as if they were useless idiots. Everyone in that room had seen the recording, and yet, none of them noticed what she did. If they were all so blind, maybe the exam format really was a waste of time. The day after the final deliberation, the examinees were called back to the town square. They were asked to gather at 11 in the morning. Tensions were high, and everyone hoped to receive the long-awaited acceptance. The moment finally arrived. A representative from the academy announced loudly that 6 candidates had passed the swordsmanship course. Everyone held their ballots and prayed to be one of the 6. The first to be called were candidates number 5 and 217, their ballots immediately bursting into flames and disappearing. Next were candidates number 432, 615, 753, and 925. That was it. Out of hundreds, only 6 proved skillful enough to be accepted into the most prestigious training institute in this manhwa world. Gray arrived that day with a sliver of hope, only to have it completely crushed by the reality that he might not be good enough. The successful candidates were instructed to cross the bridge and complete the enrollment process before the day ended. Those who passed were naturally excited to begin the life of an elite, a classic manhwa trope, while those who failed looked down, sunken in disappointment. With the swordsmanship course concluded, the representative surprised everyone by announcing that one examinee had been selected through the Divine Eye special admission. Of course, in a twist straight out of a manhwa, it was none other than candidate number 513, Gray himself. His ballot burned with a different hue than the others, a brilliant blue flame that inevitably drew everyone's attention. Just when he thought he would have to train and rehabilitate his injury for another year, Gray was granted a pass. The other candidates laughed mockingly upon hearing the mention of the Divine Eye's special admission. Gray had no idea what he was getting into. It was the first time he had ever heard of this Divine Eye business. Almost everyone considered it a second-rate admission, a way to sneak someone unworthy in through the back door, a sign of the World Union Academy's decline, a plot point worthy of a great manhwa. Hearing the poisonous comments around him, Gray didn't like being called a backdoor student at all. He wondered how he had been selected when he had no relevant connections. His master couldn't possibly have that much influence in the academy. While the failures mocked, the only one admitted by the Divine Eye, an old hermit baldly reprimanded them for disrespecting a century-old tradition. To the hermit, that admission was an honorable category that had produced countless heroes for over a century. As expected, the failures also mocked him for being out of touch. Sure, the Divine Eye was considered the cradle of heroes in its time, but not anymore. Recent Divine Eye candidates in this manhwa included Amy White, Bella Albright, Lee Mueller, and Jacob Bloomfield. The four of them had something in common. They were all seen as total failures. But we've heard those names before. In the near future, Amy White would become the Sword Saint, Bella Albright would transform into the Great Sage, and Jacob Bloomfield would take the title of Divine Archer. The three would reach the pinnacle of their art as the main force against the Liquidator, the ultimate villain in this manhwa's world. Now, Gray's name will be mentioned alongside these legends. The accepted students were welcomed and given uniforms to change into. The entrance ceremony would begin soon, and the freshmen were to gather in the plaza in front of the main office. Gray tried on his new outfit and it fit perfectly. His black blazer with gold inlays and the academy's emblem looked impeccable. He went from feeling defeated to feeling elegant alongside his peers. When they arrived at the plaza, some freshmen looked confused. There was nothing there. The confusion dissipated when an academy staff member ran towards them with an apologetic expression, explaining that there had been a slight delay in preparing the ceremony due to a mix-up. Fortunately, it wouldn't take them long to resolve it. To do so, the freshmen had to step back a bit further so the setup could be placed. The freshman followed the instructions of the staff member and watched with skepticism. The staff member knelt and began to manipulate the ground. After a little preparation, he touched the floor and activated a huge magic circle in the blink of an eye. Out of nowhere, hundreds of Colosseum-style seats emerged from the magic circle. The freshmen were stunned. They had never seen magic of such a scale, like a scene from an epic manhwa. In a matter of seconds, the plaza was transformed into a proper arena, complete with seats and a stage. The staff member apologized again for the delay and instructed the freshmen to sit wherever they wanted. Still shocked by the absurd display of magic, they complied. Some of the more knowledgeable freshmen recognized the use of teleportation magic to literally materialize an arena. Gray calmly sat in the middle row. This was supposed to be the academy's way of holding a grand entrance ceremony. Near the school building, they were basically showing off the power of the World Union Academy, a classic move in this kind of manhwa. Once everyone was seated, other freshmen commented that the number of seats was a bit excessive. There were only 30 of them present, yet there were hundreds of seats. Well, that was because, as the name of the World Union Academy suggests, this institution gathers the elite from all over the world, a setting fitting for a top-tier manhwa. If you look at the sky, you'll see what that really means. Dozens of airships and dragon carriages were flying overhead, covering the Sunday. Looking up, Gray recognized the airship, the largest magic airship, as the Strato Queen. He had boarded that colossal beast once when he was cannon fodder for the Liquidator subjugation squad. It truly lived up to its reputation. Bringing something so imposing for a simple entrance ceremony was just another way to impress the freshmen. The World Union Academy certainly knew how to flaunt its power, a key element in any good manhwa. Once all the ships landed safely, the students who had passed the strict entrance exam in their respective regions of the world descended, taking the remaining seats, filling the stands with everyone gathered. It was time to begin. The staff member who had summoned the arena gave the signal for the start of the rest of their lives. After all the flashy displays of influence, the entrance ceremony continued with a brief speech from the principal. Gray was feeling a bit bored in his seat, a classic trait for a manhwa protagonist, even though he was entering the most prestigious academy in the world. The whole ceremony just seemed like another tedious assembly to him. Next, the principal called the top students from each course to the podium. The boy sitting next to Gray stood up. The blonde's name was Leonard, the top student of the swordsmanship course. As he confidently walked down the stairs, rumors began to circulate about his incredible feat of defeating the examiner. Instantly, in a scene straight out of a power-scaling manhwa, some were even saying that this rookie was already as good as any of the professors when it came to swordsmanship. Leonard looked like a spy, tasked with forming a fake family with an assassin and a mind-reading little girl. Gray was unimpressed, just a little curious. Before beginning his speech, Leonard confirmed that he was allowed to speak freely from the heart. Once he received the go-ahead, he turned to face his fellow freshmen. With a sharp gaze, he opened his speech by lodging a formal complaint with the academy, kicking off the drama like a new manhwa chapter. First, he congratulated his fellow students who had been admitted properly. He considered it a great honor to be among the finest of the current generation. Leonard hoped that all of them would graduate as individuals capable of making significant contributions to the world. To do so, they needed to work together. He looked forward to the day he and his classmates would stand tall as proud students of the prestigious World Union Academy. That said, in a classic manhwa plot twist, he pointed out that among them was someone who didn't deserve to be there at all. He aimed this accusation directly at Professor Ariel, who oversaw the Divine Eye special admissions. She was quite taken aback to be questioned by a freshman on his very first day of school. Professor Ariel affirmed that every student there had passed a rigorous examination. They might not be as overpowering as Leonard, but they proved they deserved to be there. Curious and fascinated, she asked the cocky freshman why he was barking like a little lapdog, not beating around the bush. Leonard openly mentioned the mysterious candidate who was admitted through an obsolete backdoor admission system. Like everyone else, he sees the Divine Eye special admission as a way to sneak unqualified students into the academy. Leonard roared that the specially admitted student should just show themselves, return the honorable uniform, and leave in shame. His words and determination, like something out of a dramatic manhwa, seemed to fire up the other freshmen. Meanwhile, the one being called out was trying to lay low. This is a classic setup for an overpowered protagonist in a manhwa. Luckily, that hostile top student doesn't know Gray's face. If he just stays quiet, he should be fine, right? Professor Ariel had to step in and break the tension, praising the vitality of this year's batch. Refusing to back down, Leonard pressed his point about admitting students through an outdated program. A little irritated with the blonde, Professor Ariel ominously asked if he was sure he could beat the kid she personally selected for her program. Leonard was forced to take a few steps back. Feeling the pressure from the enigmatic professor, he tried to stammer a response, but couldn't. Gritting his teeth and regaining his composure, Leonard confidently replied that he could smash that unqualified student's face in. Ariel was already expecting such a response. She likes boys with attitude, so she proposed a bet. She would be willing to put her job on the line and also the future of that boy at the academy. Gray didn't like the sound of that bet at all. Leonard asked if the bet would be a direct fight against the special admissions student, but Professor Ariel wouldn't do something so boring and crude for this manhwa. She's also sure that if her boy gives it his all, little Leonard would end up dead in a ditch. As an educator, she can't risk the life of a promising student. Her words cut through Leonard's pride like a hot knife through butter. If she was trying to provoke him into accepting the bet, she definitely succeeded. Professor Ariel then proposed that the bet be about monster subjugation. That way it would be a bit safer for everyone involved. Besides, she knows Leonard is better at fighting monsters than humans, a key detail in this manhwa. The details are simple. Both participants must kill the monsters she chooses as targets. Each round, the target monster will increase in strength. Whoever gives up first and fails to subjugate the target, loses. If her boy loses, she will gladly step down from her respected position as a professor and expel all the special admission students under her care. But if he loses, little Leonard will have to do everything she says. I know many of you would agree to be the red-headed professor's slave without hesitation. Before agreeing, Leonard asked what the first target monster would be. Although he's sure he can face any opponent, he'd rather not get caught up in something weird. After some deliberation, she thought of the perfect target. She wants the head of an ogre general on her desk. If that's too easy for little Leonard, she'll gladly increase the difficulty. But based on the audience's reaction, there's no need. While everyone called her demand outrageous, Gray was trying to understand why she would choose an ogre general, specifically a monster he had already killed in this manhwa. Leonard, on the other hand, slammed his fist on the podium. He vehemently argued that an ogre general is not a monster someone can subjugate alone. Seeing the blonde boy protest, she lowered the difficulty and set the deadline for 1 whole year. Even so, little Leonard refused to accept. He argued that if someone could single-handedly kill a disaster-level monster with only 1 year of training, people wouldn't suffer so much. If they were to go ahead with this absurd bet, the fool demanded a more realistic target. Then he realized that this cunning woman deliberately chose a monster that no one can defeat so she could end the bet without a clear winner. A clever plot twist for a manhwa. As he kept complaining, Professor Ariel relented and added one more clause to the bet. If the result is a tie, little Leonard would win. In other words, if her boy fails to defeat the ogre general within the 1 year deadline, she will gladly resign and expel all her special students. With all these conditions set to give Leonard the biggest advantage possible, he would look like a coward if he still refuses. The cheap Lloyd Forger knockoff must realize he's being manipulated, a classic trope for a Manhwa rival, and that the outcome was already decided. But he was dragged in by the maneuvers of the professor, and was forced to accept a bet that seemed foolproof. To go on record, he asked if a weakened or injured ogre general would count. Needless to say, the monster must be in its natural combat form to seal the deal. The eye under the professor's monocle gleamed as her magic formed a contract. Every detail was listed and imprinted on the magical contract. All little Leonard had to do was sign it if he was ready. With all the faculty and the other first-year students as witnesses, he signed his name on the arcane document willingly. After sealing the deal, he asked with some doubt if the boy admitted through the back door could actually win. Professor Ariel didn't bother to give him a direct answer. The other professors just watched from their seats, apparently used to the antics of the old red-haired raccoon. Everyone sees her as a mage who is past her prime, bored and doing random things just for fun. From his seat, Gray sighed in defeat as he watched a bet that would determine his future become official without him being able to do anything. He also noticed that she formulated the conditions deliberately to fit the ogre general he had already killed within the set time frame. This bet, straight out of a manhwa, was decided the moment it began. Professor Ariel manipulated Leonard and everyone else, and Gray was the only one who noticed. She definitely plays dirty, but having someone like that on your side is a huge advantage. After the betting fiasco, the welcoming ceremony concluded and the freshmen were led to their first class, Fundamentals of Magic. The professor in charge of the class acknowledged that it was a bit surprising to start with a lesson on the very first day of school. He wanted his students to get used to the pace. At this academy, they can't afford to waste a single day. Today they will start with the most basic of basics, a classic manhwa trope, the simple use of magic. Within the human body there is an invisible energy called ether. One can manipulate the body's magic circuits and access untold amounts of power. At first, Gray was afraid he wouldn't be able to keep up with the classes, but this first lesson seemed manageable. He had already heard the same explanations during the subjugation camp. However, he was unlucky with the class he was assigned to. Of all the introductory magic classes, he ended up in the same one as Leonard Pius. If people find out that he is the hated special admission student of the Divine Eye, he can kiss his peace goodbye. While our manhwa hero was lost in thought, the professor noticed him and called him out for looking bored during class. The professor felt offended that a freshman was already zoning out less than 5 minutes into his introductory course. Gray immediately apologized for his blank stare. Still, he found it strange that the professor singled him out all the way at the back of the classroom. The professor, like a typical manhwa antagonist, escalated the situation and demanded a demonstration from the distracted student. If he looks bored in an introductory class, that must mean he can use basic magic, right? Gray was not one to be easily intimidated. He respectfully insisted that he specializes in swordsmanship. He thought it would be fine if he couldn't use magic. The professor yelled at him that even if one uses a sword in a real fight, they still need to learn the basics to coordinate with an allied mage, a key lesson in this action manhwa. How it feels is the least a swordsman should do. At that moment, Gray remembered hearing the same thing during his lessons at the camp. In that case, today's class might end with the same spell for confirmation. He asked if today's lesson would focus on learning the simple, yet effective ether projectile. Since he knew the name, the professor assumed he could use it. Gray thanked the gods for the hellish training camp he had to endure. As this would be a good opportunity for a proper demonstration, the professor decided to turn this into a one-on-one duel. He called the year's top swordsman, Leonard, to the stage. The blond man stood up, delighted, and greeted the professor respectfully. That said, he explained that he was trained in swordsmanship and magic even before entering the school, so it might be a bit risky for a rookie to face him. The professor stated that no matter how great the skill gap was, ether bullets aren't lethal, so there was no need to hold back. Furthermore, he revealed that Gray is this year's student admitted by the Divine Eye, knowing just how much Leonard despises the nameless student who got in through the back door. All the students in the classroom turned towards Gray, memorizing his face. It was all a setup from the very beginning. He couldn't even get through the day without being exposed by a damn professor. That despicable old man revealed his identity with intentions that were clearly malicious. Hearing he had a chance to fire a literal bullet at the guy he hates, Leonard immediately accepted to teach the little backdoor kid how things work. This was his chance to show an outsider with no merits what kind of place the World Union Academy truly is. This kind of academy setting is very popular in manhwa. With veins popping from anger, he demanded that Gray get on the damn stage at once. This was not how our boy's first day was supposed to go. On stage, they stood facing each other while the troublemaking professor explained the rules. He would give the signal, and both parties would fire their ether bullets at the opponent. Gray had only spent a few days learning basic magic at the training camp. This kind of overpowered protagonist is a staple in the manhwa genre. Sure, the professor said the bullets aren't lethal, but that doesn't mean they don't hurt. As soon as the signal was given, Leonard gathered a large amount of ether in his hands, determined to show the difference between a real student and a fake one. Cornered and forced to defend himself, Gray also gathered and manipulated his ether, channeling all his prior knowledge into one desperate attempt. The entire classroom fell silent as they witnessed a massive black hole, threatening to swallow an insignificant ether bullet. Both Leonard and Gray were flabbergasted, neither of them expecting this madness. As expected, the tiny ether bullet was completely absorbed by the raging black hole. Fear was evident in Leonard's eyes, as he watched the clearly lethal spell closing in on him. In a panic, the professor raised his hand and did his best to prevent the worst by using his own magic. A golden barrier blocked the advance of the seemingly unstoppable, anomalous ether bullet. He managed to cushion most of the impact, but it was a close call. He made the mistake of relaxing, and the barrier began to show dangerous cracks under the pressure. Finally, the black hole-type ether bullet reached its limit and exploded, shattering into pieces. The cliffhanger in this manhwa chapter is intense, the magic barrier into millions of shining particles. The resulting explosion plunged the classroom into a chaotic scene worthy of a manhwa, the rookies shutting their eyes and bracing for impact. As for the target, little Leonard was thrown to the ground, screaming his head off as he realized he had messed up. The professor immediately rushed over to the rising star of the swordsmanship course to make sure he was okay. Leonard got back up, dusted himself off, and assured the professor that he was fine. After confirming the blonde boy was all right, the professor turned his attention to the one who nearly blew the place up. If the barrier hadn't managed to cushion the blow, that anomalous ether bullet could have killed Leonard and injured many others. Not even among the veteran magic professors is there anyone at the academy capable of casting such a powerful ether bullet. He desperately wanted to know what this young man had done to produce such destructive power. Gray himself was confused. What he had just cast was clearly on another level compared to his opponent's weak technique. Could it be that the spell he learned as part of the subjugation squad was different from the one taught at the academy? He asked the professor if he had made a mistake, but the old man was quite certain that what he cast was, without a doubt, an ether bullet. The only obvious difference was the quality of the spell. What Gray had just used to power the spell was not normal ether. That size and power could only be achieved by using super compressed ether. None of the rookies had ever heard of it, let alone understood how it worked. The term super compressed ether is something that even the professors with years of experience struggled to produce and study. Yet, this controversial student casually used it to recast a basic spell, a feat that would be a highlight in any action manhwa. No one in this academy can replicate it. Now, the students are beginning to feel respect and a bit of fear for the boy who was admitted through the divine eye. They even protested that Gray should have been enrolled in the magic course. As far as he could remember, all the spells he learned with the subjugation squad were exactly like the one he just used. Among the group, Ray was one of those who had no aptitude for magic. Still refusing to believe he was using some kind of enhanced ether, he summoned another ether bullet and insisted that doing something like that is possible, for anyone with enough practice. To his surprise, the professor just burst out laughing like a madman. Gray didn't know what to do, so he just stood there completely bewildered. The professor's tone changed completely. At the beginning of the class, he had been blatantly hostile. Now he was trying to recruit the special admission student for the magic course. Gray respectfully declined the enthusiastic invitation. He had always been told he had no talent for magic, a classic setup in many a manhwa, so he didn't see himself on that path. The professor considered this refusal to be absurd. If a young man who can produce super compressed ether through compression is considered untalented, then everyone else should just give up on magic. And he even went so far as to declare Gray a peerless prodigy, a talent you'd only read about in a manhwa, even by the academy's standards. Whoever said that boy has no talent for magic was out of their mind. The rookies watched the scene unfold like a chapter of their favorite manhwa. They saw how the strict professor transformed into a completely different person as he desperately tried to convince Gray to switch to the magic department. From his point of view, it would be a great loss for the world if Gray didn't follow the path of magic. In fact, it would be a crime against the arcane, a high-stakes declaration often found in a magic-focused manhwa. With so much flattery coming from all sides, the only thing the young man could do was laugh at the absurdity of the situation. Then he remembered, once hearing the term ether compression technique, it was just another day at the training grounds and one of the heroes was giving a lesson. She recounted how in the past people didn't know that OD existed, also known as life force. Due to that lack of knowledge, casting magic properly was very difficult. One had to constantly compress the ether within the body to achieve the desired effect through a spell. This primitive method only gathered a minimal amount of odd. The instructor, Miss Bella Albright, the great sage and future most powerful mage, considered the magical practices of just a decade ago laughable, a detail that adds depth to this manhwa's world-building. Gray asked the professor if he had ever heard of odd. The question left the old man perplexed. He was not familiar with the term at all, and judging by that reaction, it seems the world has not yet discovered this revolutionary magical concept in this era. If that's the case, then the basics that Gray learned in the subjugation squad can be considered knowledge from the future. He finally understood that he must be careful not to reveal this type of information. For the last time, he rejected the insistent offer to change his major. His true love is the sword, so he had to refuse. The professor sighed in defeat and accepted, helplessly, the young man's decision to stick with weapons, but he also left him an open invitation to switch departments whenever he wished. Feeling a headache coming on, the young man awkwardly thanked the enthusiastic professor for his generous offer. After that demonstration, both participants were asked to return to their seats. The professor promised not to scold Gray during class again. In fact, he wouldn't mind if the boy left if he ever got bored. The professor believes this content is too basic for a prodigy like Gray, a common trope in many a manhwa. Gray had descended the stairs to hostile glares, but he now walked back up with the reverence of the professor and his classmates. Meanwhile, his victim was still standing on the ruined stage, blushing and with his lion's heart pounding fiercely for Lord Gray. He couldn't see what Leonard looked like from down there, but Gray certainly felt a shiver run down his spine. After the first class, he received a personal note from Professor Ariel, asking him to meet her in her office after classes. Basically, he was suddenly summoned, a classic manhwa plot device. It would be problematic if old Professor Carlos was behind this unexpected situation. After walking for a few minutes, he finally found the office door bearing the mark of the divine eye. He intended to knock, but the door opened smoothly, letting him pass. Taking the unlocked door as an invitation, Gray entered respectfully while uttering a formal greeting. Before he could finish his sentence, he felt a sharp blade coming at him from the side, a perfect cliffhanger for any manhwa. His reflexes kicked in immediately as he drew his sword to defend himself. The grip was somewhat unorthodox, but it worked. In the heat of the moment, he managed to deflect the surprise attack and send the attacker flying. Once she was repelled, Gray realized that he had acted purely on instinct. He went to confront the aggressor, but it was just a young, blue-haired girl who couldn't even hold the sword properly in her hands. Observing her more closely, Gray realized he knew this girl all too well. This short girl would, in the future, become a pillar, an unwavering pillar of humanity and hope. His attention was then drawn to the desk at the back of the office, where the woman sitting there congratulated him on his quick reaction. Professor Ariel was delighted to confirm that her intuition had been correct when evaluating him during the entrance exam. There were two other men in the room, Ariel's fellow professors, who were still skeptical about the new member of the Divine Eye. The whole situation felt like the beginning of a new manhwa arc, but her sword was knocked from her hands far too easily. Upon hearing that name, Gray's memories of the supreme mage from his past life came rushing back. This is a very popular manhwa trope. Who would have thought that sorceress would look so adorable in her youth? Meanwhile, Ariel insisted on, pestering her colleagues to admit they were wrong instead of making excuses. In the end, the other professors loosened their wallets and gave their gambling-addicted colleague her winnings. They had observed the split-second exchange at the entrance and had no choice but to admit that. Gray was there for a reason. Confused and uncomfortable, the young man asked what was going on, and why he had been summoned. Ariel simply explained they had made a bet to see if the new kid could defend himself from Bella's surprise attack or not. Thanks to him, she won a nice sum today. As a thank you, she tossed a portion of her winnings to her new student. He caught the coin mid-air and found a shiny gold piece in his hand. One single gold coin is practically a small fortune, a classic reward in a fantasy manhwa. Although they admitted to losing the bet, the other professors also mentioned an obvious detail they had passed over in the entrance exam. From the previous exchange, they realized that the young man avoided, deliberately using his dominant arm to defend himself. It was as if he was trying to protect an immobile arm. The most likely explanation for that peculiarity would be an injury, but more than an obvious physical injury to the muscles, something any professor would detect. This boy suffers from a deeper wound. It was the kind of hidden trauma that makes for a compelling manhwa character. Gray was surprised that the professors deduced so many correct details just from watching him draw his sword to defend himself. Well, they are educators at the most prestigious academic institution in the world for a reason, a classic setting in the manhwa genre. They still managed to piece together the full picture. That said, Ariel kicked her colleagues out. Now that she had her money, they had missed out on a rare find and she wasn't planning on giving Gray up for now. The professors gladly admitted the boy has potential, but if that wound doesn't heal and continues to fester, Gray will always be the kid who didn't meet the standard of the academy, but was accepted anyway. He didn't like their tone at all. Threatening tone with which that professor made her comment, as the skeptical teachers left the office. Only Ariel and her student remained. With the nuisances out of the way, it was time to get to the real reason for this pivotal Manhwa meeting. She had called him that day to talk about magic. After serving an aromatic tea, Professor Ariel reiterated what she heard happened in Professor Carlos's class. She learned from the man himself that the insistent idiot broke into her office, demanding that the new kid be transferred to the magic course. Obviously, she rejected such a ridiculous request. According to her analytical eyes, Gray would become a much more terrifying beast wielding a sword than using magic, a classic power progression in any action manhwa. Taking off her monocle to explain what she meant, Gray was baffled. Professor Ariel saw no signs in him of genius or magical compression whatsoever, nor did he even show hints of having practiced magic at a profound level. Gray felt a bit uneasy after being analyzed and read like an open book by that strange eye. Seeing that lying would be completely useless in this situation, Gray admitted that everything she had deduced was true, a classic manhwa moment of truth. Curious, she kindly asked if he would be willing to share the trick he used to conjure that black hole-type ether bullet. She promised complete discretion and a reward in exchange for that valuable information. She truly wanted to learn about that promising concept for Bella's sake. While drinking tea, Gray almost let it slip and call her by her future title. Professor Ariel said the young woman was a pure genius in magical theory, though without the ability to apply what she could theorize. For some unknown reason, she lacks the ability to use ether compression, let alone the mythical supercompression often detailed in a magic manhwa. According to scattered information he had from the future, Gray knew that Bella Albright was a late bloomer. Her lack of practical talent must be the reason Ariel organized this meeting after learning about the ether bullet supercompressed that almost killed Leon. If there was a way to use supercompressed ether, without resorting to the inefficient internal compression technique, it would be a total game changer for the world of this manhwa. Professor Ariel is desperate for solutions. She doesn't want to see one of her girls end up in the hands of Professor Bradley in the future. Everyone would come to know that cursed name. It's impossible not to be aware of the infamous and despicable criminal, a villain straight out of a grimdark manhwa. A grade. He conducted countless human experiments on his own under the pretext of advancing his field, murdering many in the process. Furthermore, he caused catastrophic magical disasters that cost the lives of tens of thousands. Professor Bradley is the most infamous magical criminal in history. In this era, that magical terrorist and mass murderer was a villain of truly epic manhwa proportions, has not yet been captured. If Bella fails to create supercompressed ether before the end of the year, she will be sent to that madman to undergo a high-risk surgery. Anyone with common sense would see that's a terrible idea. Professor Ariel couldn't agree more. Although the surgery is justified as a procedure to enhance magical abilities, it's actually just vulgar human experimentation with no guarantees. It hasn't been made public yet, but rumors about the crimes are already circulating. The lunatic's inhuman acts. Some victims have died, while others were left broken beyond all hope. Bella chimed in, saying that although it's dangerous and terrifying, she'll be expelled at the end of the year if she doesn't produce results. Gray deliberated silently. He possesses magical theories that don't exist yet, and if he shares something so drastic, the course of history will change completely. He watched the young Bella clenching her fists in frustration and fear. Gray remembered his final moments facing the liquidator. That frustration, that fear, and that helplessness were all too familiar. He was just cannon fodder, trained to fall in one blow, a helpless spectator while the heroes who were supposed to save the world were torn apart like fresh meat. A grim scene from a dark manhwa. If he does nothing, why wouldn't he want to change the course of history? That hell they call the future is much better if it's altered. By the time he finished his tea, he had already agreed to try and teach Bella to the best of his ability. She'll be using supercompressed ether in no time. After the meeting, the three of them headed to the arena as the sun began to set. Gray took out the blackboard and did his best to articulate what he had learned in the training camp lessons. After squeezing out every fragment of memory he could, he asked the girls to keep that privileged information just between them. Leaks wouldn't be a problem, as the professor had prepared a magical contract in advance. Whoever breaks it will die. After explaining everything, Gray asked them for their opinion on the theory. Just learning the concept of OT was enough to leave Professor Ariel speechless, but the magical knowledge he revealed was even more absurd, like a plot twist in a manhwa. Bella praised his explanation as brief yet well-organized. She felt as if she were listening to a magic lesson from hundreds of years in the future. Just by Bella listening and absorbing that flood of information, The history of magic had advanced a century in that room, a development worthy of a popular manhwa, even though Gray had learned all those basic concepts from the adult version of the sorceress just 10 years in the future. It's a testament to the genius that Bella represents. There was a lot of information that even Professor Ariel couldn't fully understand or judge correctly, so she left that part in the hands of her little magical prodigy. According to Bella's rough estimate, there was a high probability that the theory was solid. None of the concepts contradict the current magical theory that governs the world, but the fastest way to check was to put it to the test, and that's why they were using the arena. If the theory was valid, the spell that Bella improvised on the spot should work. Holding a staff with both hands, she placed all her trust in the teachings of Gray and accessed her full power. That didn't sound good at all. If Gray remembered correctly, it was said that Bella's strength Albright was capable of reducing an entire city to ashes in an instant, practically a weapon of mass destruction straight from a manhwa. Furthermore, she was famous for having no control whatsoever over the enormous magical power she wielded. Today would be the day he would witness that legendary display of power. Even Bella was surprised to see what she had just unleashed. A gigantic, scorching blaze shot out, a classic manhwa power-up scene, from the center of the arena and rose until it reached the clouds. Gray tried to warn her how reckless that idea was, but it was already too late. The pillar of fire stood imposingly with the young mage at its base, holding an equally impressive magic circle. That overwhelming power, straight out of a fantasy manhwa, represented the pinnacle of magic in Gray's past life. If Bella hadn't taken control of the spell a fraction of a second sooner, he would have been devoured by the flames. That precise elemental manipulation literally saved his life. Oblivious to the fear she instilled in others, Bella smiled with immense joy. She had finally done it. She had managed to connect her theoretical talent with her practical ability. Motivated, she decided to go further and tame the pillar of fire, shaping it into a roaring, fiery dragon. For the first time in her life, she found magic fun, a refreshing character development in this manhwa. She got carried away by the moment and ended up exhausting herself. The fire went out, and she immediately felt the cost of her experiment. She ran out of ether reserves, her legs could no longer support her, and she lost consciousness. The staff fell to the ground, as did her body. Worried, Gray ran to the unconscious girl, while the professor asked him to calm down. This collapse was a case of classic ether exhaustion. All Bella needed was a little rest, and in a short time she would be back to 100%. Hearing that, Gray calmed down. Still, even Ariel was astonished by the magnificent display of magical talent the young woman had shown. She might be the only person in this entire manhwa capable of constructing magic on such a scale immediately after learning a new concept. Completely out of it, the half-asleep mage murmured that she wasn't the amazing one, but the theory was. Gray had given her the tool to create her own super-compressed ether with ease. Well, a tool that, in theory, she herself was supposed to develop in the future. Ariel sighed in relief, glad that a key character in this manhwa no longer needs that shady operation from the arcane criminal. Gladly, she cursed Bradley herself. The professor was happy to see that her young mage had avoided a disastrous path. She was glad, especially, that she hadn't lost control of her magic through an unauthorized experiment. Although Bradley's special surgeries have been proven to increase a person's magical capacity, they do so at the cost of control. No one knows exactly how it works, but it's very likely that Lunatic has found a way to forcibly break a person's natural limiter. Now this entire manhwa plot point makes sense. That explains the tragic backstory from the manhwa, why the sorceress from the past world was considered an out-of-control weapon of mass destruction. In any case, today's enormous progress wouldn't have been possible without Gray's help. The terms of their contract have been fulfilled, a pivotal moment in this manhwa's arc. So now it's the professor's turn to meet her obligations described in the magic scroll. First of all, she promised to do something about his arm. There's a spell in her repertoire that could help. Extending her hand, she summoned countless translucent butterflies made of pure ether. They flew around the arena as she gently touched the student's hand. Upon contact, the surrounding ether began to swirl and concentrate at the point of connection for a few seconds. Gray openly accepted the healing touch, then tried to close his injured hand and felt a drastic difference. And in comfort compared to before, he could finally move his dominant hand again. It was a huge improvement. Elated, he thanked the professor from the bottom of his heart for solving one of his biggest problems. Not even a magic healing potion had been able to heal his mysterious wound, but her light touch did the trick. She boasted, saying that her nerve-restoring magic, a skill worthy of a top-tier manhwa, shouldn't be compared to common, vulgar healing potions. Before getting carried away by emotion, he wanted to make sure he was truly at 100%. To test it, Gray had to try swinging a sword. For the first time in a long while, He gripped the hilt of his blade with his dominant hand, drew it quickly, and made a casual slash. He immediately noticed something worrying despite the supposed full recovery of his arm. To confirm it, he lowered his stance and began to execute the movements of his swordsmanship style to feel the difference. To his dismay, his right arm didn't move with the same fluidity as before. Professor Ariel expected something like this to happen. She may have repaired the nerves perfectly, but her magic cannot heal the wounds on the young man's soul. Hearing her mention the soul, Gray was confused. Although current magical knowledge has not proven the existence of the human soul, Ariel is a firm believer that it exists. After all, she can see it with her special eye, a power straight out of a fantasy manhwa. Beneath that shining monocle hides an all-seeing eye, capable of perceiving everything. At that moment, she could see how Gray's soul was slowly healing. Over time, she theorized that as long as he didn't overexert himself, it would recover naturally. He innocently asked if practicing his sword style would count as overexertion. The professor replied that it wouldn't, that he could train normally. Rather, she asked him what kind of sword art he practiced that could damage someone's soul in such a way. Although on the other hand, using the soul as fuel for swordsmanship is not a new idea in this manhwa world. In fact, she knows someone with that same ability, Ami White. She's another student in the special admission course of the Divine Eye. She guessed there must be some kind of connection between those two students of hers. Gray was baffled and confused by the reason for her assumption. He hasn't even met the future sword saint in this timeline yet. Ariel assumed Gray knew Ami because of the way he wielded his sword. It gave the impression that he had learned from that blade fanatic. Although on second thought, the professor noticed slight differences. It seemed as if the person who taught him swordsmanship was a version much more skilled than little Ami. She calculates that in a few years, Ami will be as talented as Gray's master, whoever that was. Her deductive ability is terrifying, almost like a cheat skill from a manhwa. Her eye can see the finest details, and she interprets them with precision. Gray claimed he learned to wield a sword at the dojo in his hometown, which isn't technically a lie. For now, he needed to change the subject before he risked revealing his secrets by returning to the matter of damaged souls and swordsmanship. Ordinary techniques cannot connect these two intangible concepts. For starters, she knows full well that Gray has some secret move, the kind of ultimate skill you'd read about in a manhwa, capable of defeating an ogre general, an army of ogres, and everything around him. With a single slash, he had already done his job, thanks to Gray's absurd feat. The bet he proposed with the little lion during the entrance ceremony was a guaranteed victory. Ariel was shown some of the remains left at the scene and found them simply magnificent. Not even the most sophisticated cutting magic could achieve that level of precision and lethality. That mysterious power within Gray felt like something from a top-tier manhwa. Whatever it is, was what caused the wound on his soul. She can see it with her own eyes. Ariel can look through his soul and observe the power leaking from a chained door. Hearing her say that made him a believer. That chained door is the image that always comes back to his mind. It's not something you can guess or fake. This woman is the real deal. She's authentic. That said, Ariel had seen a power similar to Gray's before. Although it wasn't an exact copy, they both shared the same unsettling energy. Curious, Gray asked if there were other people with mysterious powers like his. She knows someone who fits that description, although she's not entirely sure if he's human or not. Professor Ariel called him the Liquidator, the same Liquidator who brought about the end of the world, setting the stage for this manhwa. From his reaction, she realized the boy had heard of him somehow. Gray's mind went numb. Why is the Liquidator being mentioned so early in this timeline? The alluring professor didn't expect the young man to be familiar with such an esoteric being, but considering he possesses magical knowledge from the future, this manhwa protagonist was full of surprises. It wasn't that big of a surprise. Gray felt somewhat uncomfortable taking credit for a revolutionary theory when he actually just repeated what he learned from the true genius. Curious, Ariel pressed him to find out how much he knew about the so-called Liquidator. In all honesty, he doesn't know much, but he is certain that the Liquidator is an extremely dangerous threat to humanity. That creature must be stopped before it gathers more power. It's something that must be destroyed no matter the cost. Ariel considered his stance somewhat extreme, but agreed that the Liquidator poses a danger. Still, Bailey Bradley seems determined to continue his experiments on that subject. Everything indicates that the future apocalyptic catastrophe is somehow related to the infamous magic terrorist. As far as Ariel knows, the Liquidator is the same being that Bailey Bradley is trying to summon. This shocking manhwa plot twist left Gray stunned. No one had ever told him the origin of humanity's enemy. Thinking back, the Academy in the previous timeline served as the central point of the manhwa's story. The authorities acted as if they knew exactly where the Liquidator would appear. There's a strong possibility that the World Union Academy was involved in its summoning from the very beginning. a dark secret for our manhwa hero to uncover. The professor and the reserved freshman agreed that this experiment was extremely reckless and had to be stopped before it got out of hand. Unfortunately, the world of this manhwa is full of obstacles. The one responsible for these studies is also a tenured professor. Ariel has no authority to shut down his lab or stop his experiments. She already tried to pressure the higher-ups to intervene, but they simply refused to listen. Alas, she also doesn't have permission to reveal more information to a mere student. In short, unless orders come from the top, no one can force Bailey and Bradley to stop their madness. Gray hoped to at least get the names of the Academy's directors, but that's out of the question for now. It seems the Academy's leadership is more tangled than he imagined, a common trope in this kind of manhwa. However, if he manages to prove that Professor Bradley is a dangerous criminal, perhaps they'll get enough evidence to change things. In the previous timeline, a plot point straight out of a dark fantasy manhwa, Bailey's illegal experiments claimed the lives of tens of thousands of people, and Gray knows exactly where those atrocities will occur. There should be no harm in sharing that information with Professor Ariel so they could catch the maniac red-handed, but she immediately rejected the idea. Entering a professor's research facility without authorization is considered a heinous crime in itself. Perhaps they should obtain evidence some other way, without risking ending up in prison. But if Gray manages to present solid evidence now, that could change things. If not, they'll have no choice but to set this idea aside for the time being. It seems Ariel is aware of the dangers, but her hands are tied by bureaucracy and the Academy's internal politics. It's frustrating, but understandable. More importantly, she wants to delve deeper into the topic of Gray's mysterious power, a key element in this manhwa's plot. She hinted that there might be a way to learn to control that lethal weapon. There is a professor at the Academy who specializes in dealing with unknown forces. Gray's case is the perfect puzzle for him to solve. His name is Hidokawa Longfellow. Gray had heard that name before. Hidokawa Longfellow was the one who trained the Sword Saint herself. He's a legendary figure, the kind you read about in a historical manhwa. Ariel knew that proposal would capture the young man's interest. She promised him to arrange a private training session with the stoic professor for the next day. Gray gratefully accepted Ariel's help. After all, the reason he came to the Academy was to master that power. He didn't expect to find such a solid lead so quickly in this manhwa. Finally, things were starting to look up. The next day, Gray found himself in direct proximity to the stern professor. His first private lesson with Hidokawa Longfellow had begun. Ariel certainly acted quickly. Gray expected intense training or extensive theoretical lessons, typical for a power-up arc in a manhwa, but Professor Longfellow dragged him into the forest and now they were running in circles. They were still within the Academy's grounds, but they were in the middle of a dense section of the woods. As he tried to figure out the purpose of running aimlessly, Professor Longfellow scolded him for letting his mind wander. Instead of thinking about nonsense, he needed to pick up his pace. He had to run and push his body to its absolute limit. Longfellow believes that soul power only awakens when every last drop of physical strength is burned away. Gray was forbidden from touching his sword until he had exhausted his stamina completely. The young man didn't see the full picture yet, but he fully trusted Hidokawa's methods. Even so, as he ran lap after lap, Bailey was still conducting inhuman experiments to summon the Arbiter of the End, a chilling plotline for any manhwa. It was hard to get that worry out of his head. Gray carried the burden of knowing the future, and it was holding him back. Nevertheless, he stuck with the training regimen for an entire week. On the 7th day, he was summoned to report to Professor Ariel. Gray felt somewhat embarrassed that all he had done was run non-stop and practice a little swordsmanship at the end. Still, he admitted to feeling a slight improvement in his strength. Ariel couldn't hold back an amused laugh. She was well aware of Hitquad's strange methods. With the report concluded, a messenger politely entered the office and delivered a sealed letter addressed to Professor Ariel. She opened it immediately, and her expression slowly transformed as she read the contents. By the time she reached the end of the letter, she was completely frozen in her seat. Worried, Gray asked her what was wrong. Without a word, Ariel handed him the letter to read for himself. It would be better that way. It was a letter written by Bailey and Bradley. The lunatic had received the report on Bella Albright's progress with super-compressed ether. He insisted that although it was very similar, the young mage had not actually reached the reported level. Therefore, he refused to acknowledge her new ability. Consequently, the surgical contract was still valid, and the surgery would be performed as scheduled. It was an absurd letter, written by an expert at provoking fury, a classic plot device in this manhwa. Ariel was furious. It seems Bailey and Bradley are determined to get their hands on a perfect guinea pig like Bella. They are trying to force her into a completely unnecessary and dangerous procedure. A truly dark turn for this manhwa. Unfortunately, that maniac holds all the power, The magical contract Bella signed is ironclad. Unless Bradley personally voids it, Bella is forced to choose between expulsion or handing her body over to a madman. Gray refused to accept that. Ariel agreed. This letter ignited a spark of rebellion in her that spurred her to action. Disregarding bureaucracy and needing Gray's help, she wants to know the location of Bradley's secret lab. It will be risky, but she must expose that scoundrel as a criminal to nullify the ridiculous contract. She's finally willing to get her hands dirty. Just what Gray needed. With a triumphant air, he asked her why she had changed her mind about exposing a colleague without solid proof, something that carries a very high risk. Well, they are past the point of acting within the bounds of the law. She has decided to trust Gray to protect another of her precious students from the very beginning. Her insight had foreseen this would happen, that Gray was telling the truth all along. It just took a ridiculously absurd letter for her to admit it, but Ariel has finally awakened. It's time for Gray to take the lead, a pivotal moment in this manhwa's story. Together, they will bring the psychopath's crimes against humanity to light. The Dark Swordsman, a classic manhwa archetype, has returned. As far as he knows, that vile laboratory is hidden in the mountains near the town of Towel. Professor Ariel vaguely recalls hearing that one of the other professors had been granted authorization to build a laboratory there. This means those illegal and inhuman experiments have been sanctioned by the Academy. A shocking conspiracy for this manhwa. There's no better place for clandestine research than the Torbal Mountains. Practically no one will be alarmed if someone stays there for a long time. Besides, among the Academy's professors, there's an unwritten rule that prohibits interfering in each other's projects, but as long as they manage to gather proof that crimes are being committed against humanity, they shouldn't be accused of trespassing. As they discussed the plan of attack, Bella knocked on the door, and Ariel allowed her to enter. She had just received a letter with the horrible news. Her emotions now were overwhelmed by a crushing sense of defeat. Professor Ariel took the letter from her hands, assuring Bella that this disaster would be resolved one way or another. It seemed Ariel planned to confront Barry Bradley on her own, and Bella wasn't going to allow that. With a confident smile, she insisted she could handle that guy any day of the week. The worried young woman looked at Gray, pleading with him to intervene, so he stepped forward and promised to accompany the professor. With renewed determination, Bella also volunteered to go with them. She didn't want to depend on others to solve her problem. Ariel thought she could handle everything alone and warned them that Barry is an experienced professor and also a lunatic who has no respect for human life. If he catches a student, inexperienced, trying to ruin his plans, nobody knows what he'd be capable of. As the responsible adult in this situation, she couldn't risk the lives of these kids, but Gray considered that to be the very reason why going alone was even more dangerous. He claimed he could tap into the power he used to defeat a general ogre if necessary. He wouldn't be a burden. Besides, if something happened to Ariel, the Divine Eye program would undoubtedly be disbanded, getting Gray and his classmates expelled. He preferred to have a say in his future, to choose his own destiny like a true manhwa protagonist. Seeing the determination in their eyes, Ariel couldn't say no. It sounded like they would go anyway, even if she forbade it. In that case, she agreed to make this a team mission under one condition. No matter what happens, they must prioritize their safety above all else. Gray and Bella accepted the condition without hesitation. After finalizing some preventive measures, the three of them ventured into the unsettling mountains of Torbal, a setting perfect for a dark fantasy manhwa. Hidden among the rocks, the immense laboratory of Barry Bradley stood before their eyes. It's hard to imagine what kind of horrors are hidden behind those imposing walls. Once again, the main objective of this mission is to gather evidence of criminal activities, nothing more, nothing less. With rage etched in his gaze, Gray confirmed they were in the right place. On the other hand, Bella felt uneasy. She wasn't sure they could pull this off without getting into trouble, a common fear in any high-stakes manhwa. Professor Ariel had already done her homework. According to her sources, Barry Bradley was supposed to be at the Magic Society conference at that moment. The lab should be clear. Still, there was a high chance that the main entrance was full of traps. To be safe, they should break through a sidewall and make their own entrance. Anyway, breaking into a lab authorized by the Academy is already a crime, so it makes no difference how they do it. Once again, Ariel gave Bella the chance to leave if she changed her mind. Gripping her staff tightly, she left all her doubts behind. She asked if the professor was really willing to go through all this for someone like her. Gray stepped in and replied that this operation wasn't just for her. Stopping Barry Bradley's wicked plans is for the good of the world, a truly epic manhwa-level threat. If they don't do something now, countless people will die, and the entire world will suffer. Professor Ariel found his reasoning a bit exaggerated, but she agreed that the depraved animal must be stopped, so Bella should calm down and stop overthinking. She isn't the only one who needs saving. With all preparations made, Ariel took the lead, dragging Bella along while Gray ran beside them at full speed. Upon reaching the side wall of the imposing laboratory, Ariel calmly activated a fireproof spell. Several explosive bursts of flame tore through the concrete without resistance, the resulting explosion illuminating the entire mountain with a scorching light. You have to hand it to her. The professor knows how to put on a massive show. Gray was the first to peek through the makeshift entrance, and what he saw made his blood run cold. In a scene straight out of a horror manhwa, a long, dark corridor stretched before his eyes with countless cells lining both sides. Inside those cells were emaciated people, chained and in a catatonic state from extensive torture. Some looked dead, some were missing limbs and bleeding from open, infected wounds. They knew they would find something, but they didn't expect it to be so soon. They didn't even need to try hard to find incriminating evidence as the group walked down the long hallway. Every iron cell was occupied by a victim of Brian Bradley. So far, Ariel has identified traces of 14 forbidden spells used on the prisoners. That fact alone should be enough to convict Brian of serious crimes. Finally, they reached a huge room in the center of the laboratory. The floor was covered in old and fresh blood. In the center, an ominous magic circle resembling an altar was visible. The initial plan was to get in, get concrete evidence, and get out. But the young sorceress felt the need to rescue the people trapped in this hell, a classic trope in many a manhwa. Gray had a bad feeling. They shouldn't stay too long. A rescue mission would take a lot of time. And Brian could return before they could decide on their next move. A ghostly figure emerged from the shadows, walking calmly towards the group as if strolling through his private garden. Professor Ariel immediately recognized the man approaching them. It was him, the myth, the legend, and the horribly ugly mad scientist in person, Brian Bradley. This manhwa villain really thinks he has an aura. Like any good manhwa protagonist, Gray immediately drew his sword, ready to respond to any atrocity. Brian Bradley boasted that he had sent a double to the conference in his place. He is on the verge of a major breakthrough in his experiment. He bragged about having obtained extremely fresh materials for an important ceremony. You see, he likes to use his lab subjects while they are still alive and breathing. But upon seeing Professor Ariel and her precious students at his doorstep, he decided to change his plans. Ariel worried about her students. Bella was paralyzed by a visceral terror, and Gray was ready to attack at any moment in this tense manhwa scene. Tonight's experiment would yield better results if the materials used possessed magical potential superior to that of an average person. Brian has no idea how they discovered his little hell on Earth, but he is sure that these three are acting in secret, which means they didn't tell anyone where they were going. If they suddenly disappear, no one will know where to look. Whatever this lunatic has in store for them won't raise any suspicion. Forget crimes against humanity, this manhwa villain deserves the electric chair for that smile. Chilling. From the tone of his villainous speech, it's evident Professor Varian is eager to turn them into lab rats, aiming to push magic to its limits at a steep price. Since they had seen his dirty laundry, he couldn't let them live. At least he would exploit their magical potential to the fullest. In the middle of his bombastic monologue, Varian was met with a gigantic fireball, aimed straight for his head. The spell erupted with a fiery roar that illuminated the dissection room. Surprisingly, the attack didn't come from Professor Ariel, but from the future great sage, Bella Albrick. Judging by her determined expression, her initial fear had vanished. Unfortunately, a surprise attack of this kind wouldn't be enough. Varian protected himself with a barrier just in time. Even so, he praised the girl's potential and magnificent determination, crediting the discovery of such an exceptional talent to Ariel's divine eye. This manhwa has some amazing character dynamics. He had never paid attention to the special admission classes, but perhaps it was time to observe the recruits more closely from that controversial group. However, a mere academy student trying to assassinate a professor would never work. The power gap was abysmal. Leaving all her fears behind, Bella accepted that she would rather get her hands bloody than die doing nothing. She almost succeeded. Worried about her students, Ariel ordered a retreat, as they already had sufficient proof. The academy should handle the rest, but Professor Varian wouldn't allow them to leave so easily. Before they could take a single step, a searing black energy shot out from the madman's scepter, aimed directly at Bella. She froze like a deer in headlights, and Ariel had to move quickly to intervene with a radiant barrier. With maximum concentration, she reinforced the barrier as the dark energy persisted. Varian arrogantly explained that defensive magic was useless against the flame of gluttony, one of the most valuable fruits of his extensive research. This kind of unique power system is what makes this manhwa so compelling. That spell summons a flame so hungry it consumes defensive magic, turning it into fuel. In theory, it was a perfect and unstoppable spell, with the only drawback of needing a rare biological material to cast it. Just as he explained, Ariel's barrier was quickly torn apart and absorbed, causing the flame to grow in size and power. She tried to save the situation using the power of her divine eye, which bought her time to raise another barrier. When the first layer gave way, the second resisted the onslaught of the supercharged forbidden magic. As expected, that second barrier was also corroded and absorbed in seconds. The stakes in this manhwa are always incredibly high. Fearing the worst, Ariel tossed a pouch of magical memories to Bella and Gray, trusting that if Hitquad saw it, he would know what to do. Instead of taking the evidence and escaping, Bella raised her own barrier. Ariel panicked. She had already accepted that this might be her end, but it didn't have to be her students. Still, Bella was not willing to abandon her professor mid-battle while she still had some energy. The manhwa does a great job of showing her bravery. Ariel mentioned the promise they made before the mission. If something went wrong, the priority would be to survive. Varian's magic was clearly unnatural. All Ariel could do was buy time with her defensive spells, which were crumbling quickly. While arguing with her student, the last barrier broke, and Ariel felt the backlash from her failed spell. Bella took over immediately. Her translucent barrier impressively matched the power of the Flame of Gluttony. Analyzing Varian's attack, Bella deduced that it wasn't that strong on its own, but rather required a specific type of defensive magic to counter it. Seeing his spell stop dead in its tracks, Varian almost collapsed. The counter-magic theory for that spell was only known by a select few. This kind of plot twist is common in a good manhwa. How could a mere student figure it out? Bella calmly replied that someone very special had taught her a new theory recently, and thanks to that, every spell had become much easier to understand. On the verge of a breakdown, Varian went completely insane, convinced that someone in his inner circle had betrayed him and demanded to know the traitor's name, while Bella provoked him with the most innocent expression, secretly guarding her mentor's identity. The man who opened up the world of magic to her was none other than a mere student from the swordsmanship course. He patiently shared some wild magical theories, and thanks to Bella's innate genius, putting all the pieces together came naturally. This manhwa really knows how to build up its characters. Varian fell victim to a perfectly executed taunt. Look at him. His veins are about to pop. Have you ever been provoked so badly that you end up pulling out a suspicious blood crystal to further power up your ultimate attack? Crushing the crystal in his hand, the human souls trapped inside shot out to further fuel the flame of gluttony. At this point, the fire looked more like a beast with a will of its own than a simple spell. The art in this manhwa makes the scene incredibly vivid. Varian might be committing crimes against magic and humanity, but you have to admit his spell looks brutal. Still, Bella calculates that her barrier can hold on a little longer. In theory, she could prolong this confrontation indefinitely, but her mana reserves wouldn't last that long. At best, she has maybe 1 more minute left. With her hands busy on defense, it would be up to Ariel to take the offensive. Using her divine eye, the red-haired professor concentrated, clearly seeing the flow of magic. She detected a spot where the flames were thinner. If she managed to project mana outside the barrier, Ariel could break through the defense. She conjured mana-infused ropes that flowed freely through Bella's barrier, from her position to Varian. This is a classic manhwa strategy. She had a direct path for a lethal shot. Unfortunately, those mana ropes were too weak to pierce the flames of gluttony, slowly fizzling out until they disappeared completely. Varian laughed at the pathetic counterattack attempt. As Gray recalls, Professor Ariel's offensive magic is among the weakest of all the staff. Her specialty lies elsewhere. The properties of the flames devoured her already weak attack effortlessly. They have to find a way to end this now. Bella is starting to get exhausted. Her stance is weakening and her grip is trembling. The barrier could collapse at any moment, which is why Ariel tried to have her students escape earlier. With all options exhausted, it's time for the main event. Gray must take up the burden. Bella didn't know how he could possibly deal any damage with that storm of powerful magic between his sword and Varian, but Gray basically said, "Whatever, I'm gonna win." Professor Ariel could read his intentions and warned him not to use his mysterious power again. Using it so soon could leave his newly healed arm completely unusable or even kill him. Still, him dying alone was better than the 3 of them dying, right? Besides, they were worrying for nothing. The protagonist pierced through the flame of gluttony with supernatural speed, illuminating the other side with a lethal red light. Right before Varian's eyes, the last thing the demented professor saw was a perfectly unpredictable slash from Gray. Mixed with flashes of his own blood, his brain was still trying to understand what the hell had just happened, as his head was cleanly separated from his body. And so, Professor Brian Bradley was executed, as he deserved for his endless list of crimes. His executioner is the man who will change the course of this manhwa's history.